All right. Listen, one of the fascinating stories of, I guess, the last couple of years, last 3 years really, it was a big election issue, was the status of water in this country. Uh, I am one of those who personally believe that New Zealand overreacts to tragedies. And the water reforms that came in the wake of the Havelock North water poisoning, as I have to say, fits that characterization magnificently. It's a bit like the decision to classify all buildings in this country that have been up for 100 years as somehow earthquake risks in the wake of the Christchurch earthquake as well. You go, oh God, here we go again. And in actual fact, if you look back through the history of New Zealand governments have had a tendency to overreact. But one of the things that in I think there were 4 or 5 deaths in Havelock North, and it was primarily and only as a consequence of the inadequacy and the negligence. And, they could talk about corporate manslaughter just quietly, which I know is a big issue at the moment with the Pike River issue, and I am on their side on that one. But you could well have looked at the negligence of the Hastings District Council and the Hawke's Bay Regional Council at the time, and looked at laying at charges of similarly. Anyhow, in the wake of all that, as you know, there has been a significant and massive, huge, and probably the most important local government change since local government was reorganised in 1989. And that was over the creation of Taumata Arowai, which we knew it is initially, but it's now got its European name, the Water Services Authority. So it's got both those names, which is fair enough. Water Services Authority. They are responsible essentially for drinking water quality throughout this country. And they have intervened, I think for the first time, we'll find out in a minute as we talk to their chief executive. They've intervened in the curious case of Kaio. Now, Kaio is a small Northland community, and there are plenty of rural communities like Kaio. Sorry, the small Northland community, plenty of rural communities like Kaio, and they have been provided water for years, and now the Water Services Authority have stepped in and are taking it over. And it may well be a precursor, just quietly, for other interventions in other rural areas of New Zealand. To join us to talk about that is Steve Taylor, who I'm told is not the Chief Executive, but he's probably going to tell me what he is. Should be the Chief Executive, shouldn't you, Steve? Welcome to the show.
Thank-
You should be the Chief Executive, but it doesn't matter. You are not. You are the regulatory manager. Is that right?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, head of operations at the
Head of
Water Services
operations.
Authority. Thank you.
How long have you been there?
So I've been here for about 2 years. I had the fortune of joining about 3 weeks after a particular cryptosporidium outbreak in Queenstown, which
Oh, I
also
remember that.
grabbed attention at the time. So
Yep.
we're not shy of incidents happening around the country when it comes to drinking water, unfortunately. So that's the reason we have we
Well,
have work ahead of us.
and so your responsibility, the Water Services Authority or Taumata Arowai, is what? Is to ensure that every territorial authority, because they're largely responsible for water, produces good drinking water. Is that your primary aegis?
Yeah, Yeah, that's correct. In this case, our interest is ensuring that the public of New Zealand can have confidence that their drinking water is safe to drink. So we refer to it as safe drinking water. It's safe drinking water for everybody every day. And as you correctly note, the suppliers themselves are often councils. And so what we have is a regime, a system of rules and checks and assurances to ensure actually, particularly in the light of situations like Havelock, those councils are doing what they need to, and the public can have confidence that when they turn on the tap, the water's safe to drink.
Okay, so there are a huge number of drinking suppliers in this country. Let's just go to Kaio quickly. Kaio, as I understand, as I said, the small rural community in Northland. I think it's 22 kilometres northwest of Kerikeri. There we go. They have been having their water previously supplied privately. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Kai is a complex situation, and there's a couple of interesting points to note about it. First off, It was previously owned by the council, administered, maintained, everything by council. Now, they made the decision a number of years ago, because of the difficulties that they were facing with the supply, to effectively have a private operator run it. Now, it was a small scale private scheme. Through time, that operator decided actually they couldn't do it and they handed it across to another operator. Now, unfortunately, the way that that arrangement was originally set up, there are some basic requirements that weren't put in place, one of which was giving the supply owner access to the treatment plant. It's located on private property owned by a third party. So immediately you can see the sorts of problems that might arise from that
So let me
situation.
get this right. The guy who's meant to be running it doesn't get access to the plant that's running it because he can't get access to the land. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
That's absolutely correct. So it doesn't have legal access to the treatment plant, which is located on private property. And you can immediately anticipate what sort of problems this is going to create.
Yeah, yeah, you can. Has that had any consequence for the people that are consuming the water?
Yeah. So again, not surprisingly, there's a long history. So previously, drinking water was regulated by the Ministry of Health. Now, under that Ministry of Health regime, they instructed the supplier to put a boil water notice in place because the water wasn't safe to drink. It wasn't removing. We call it protozoa, but it's things like Giardia and Cryptosporidium, the same sort of problems that were in the Queenstown situation actually. And because it wasn't treating that water, boil water notice in place, you can boil the water, okay, all great. But then over time, more recently, we set an expectation with a supplier in about March of this year to say, right, this has to be sorted. You need to fix that treatment, provide that community with safe drinking water. Um, they weren't able to satisfy us of those requirements. Now, in about mid-October, we brought the council in to say, actually, there's some bigger problems going on here. We'd like to work collaboratively with you, council, and with the supplier to say, what are the options that we can put in place to find a long-term solution? And that might involve moving away from that current land ownership arrangement. Logically, there's got to be a way of working through that. Within a few days of us triggering that request for a collaborative arrangement, we were told by the supplier they could no longer access at all. They could not maintain to any extent possible, and the supply was going to be turned off. So we were faced with a situation where not only had this community been having to boil its water for 10 years, now it had no water whatsoever. The taps essentially turned off completely. So at that point, we requested the council to come in and provide some water tankers, which is the least you can do in that situation. At least they'll have water tankers. They can have drinking water. They can't necessarily flush their toilets because the water tankers aren't providing it that way unless they've got reservoirs. And we asked the council to start to identify what are the particular needs in that community, what are the supply arrangements, have they got reservoirs. Now, at that point, we started to explore and realise the limitations of the supplier's ability to solve this, the private supplier, the individual that couldn't access the land. And this week on Tuesday, it escalated to a point at which it's quite clear the collaborative process is not working. There's limitations on what council can do working with the supplier. We're going to put the supply into statutory management, which is the full transfer of responsibility to the council to manage the issue. So it's been an increased and graduated response from us, trying at each point to ensure, because we're talking about a supply that's privately owned, we don't want to arbitrarily come in and remove it without having confidence. At least the supplier's been given every opportunity. They've been given every opportunity. They cannot progress this further. And it's with their full agreement now that we've transferred that ownership back to the council. Sorry, not the
Okay,
ownership, the maintenance.
but see, this, as you say, you got involved in what, March of this year? Is that right? So that was when you first.
Yeah.
Okay, and we're now on to the 20th of November today, so that's 8 months. Um,
Hmm.
with all due respect to you, your job is to ensure and I'm not saying you, but the Water Service Authority is to ensure the quality of water supply. Um,
Hmm.
the softly approach, I have to say, that's for 8 months. Does that mean the Kaio community has been at risk of unsafe and
Yeah.
impure water being available to it?
Yeah, it's been on a board, I notice, which is yeah, as you said, it's not good enough. So the boil water notice requires when you turn the tap on, you have to boil the water, and you can drink it. But it's not a long term solution. And the the requirement to bring a tanker in, yeah, that's at least safe to drink. That's a costly option for the council. So the best solution is one where we've got the right treatment, the right solution being put in place. It's run by the right organisation, and it's in this case, I'd suggest the supplier who is there at the moment would not get there on their own. So we've considered a range of powers in this situation. We could issue a direction, we could issue a
I
prosecution,
guess, yeah,
none
I
of which is
understand that,
actually
but
going to
I just that it took you 8 months I think I hope it doesn't take you 8 months next time. I think you'll move a bit quicker, won't you? Because here's the next question: how many Kaios are there in New Zealand, Steve?
Yeah, and our focus has been absolutely with those council suppliers, the larger suppliers that have got similar requirements, similar concerns. Off the back of Queenstown, again, 2 years ago, we identified a significant number of councils didn't have the basic treatment, didn't have the basic protection in place, and that was affecting about 500,000 New Zealanders. So that was some work that we did a couple of years ago, and after that, we immediately sent letters to all of those councils with an expectation that they have to have that treatment in place. We're at a point now where that is on track. So already there's 400,000 of those 500,000 New Zealanders have now got confirmed access to safer drinking water, and the associated need for boil water notices has been lifted. So that's a
Okay,
massive
now but
change that's
that's the
happened.
crypto-Meridian Queenstown incident. I'm
Yeah,
talking about
yeah,
Kaio.
that's
How many small
yeah.
rural communities are there in New Zealand that are in a similar position, that they do not have safe drinking water available to them, or they have, or they are caught between council responsibilities and private, if you like,
Yeah.
profit?
So there's a significantly smaller number now. There's in the order of about 30 boil water notices that are in place in communities around New Zealand. So over the last year, that's dropped from upwards of 100. So as we're working around the country and setting these expectations to put the basic treatment in place, that number's coming down. But yet, again, Kaio is probably one of the most complex because you have a, a land ownership arrangement that makes it impossible for the supplier to get in. In other situations, we've been setting a really clear expectation to implement that treatment requirement, and it's flowing through. It is coming through, and
Now, my
it's
understanding as to the reason why, though, that the private supplier isn't being given access to the land is because the landowner is claiming that they haven't been paid rent or something for 7 or 8 years. Is that your understanding as well?
yeah. Look, the detail of the landowner arrangement with the supplier is something that it's probably inappropriate for us to get involved in and
Well,
comment.
I'm relying
We've
upon the public's notices, the statements
yeah,
of the landowner here when I
yeah,
ask that question.
yeah. So yeah, and that's my understanding as well. Look, there's concerns raised by the landowner around lack of payment from the supplier. So he'll be or the landowner will be concerned about the cost to them individually, but the community is obviously more concerned about the lack of safe drinking water.
Can I ask the obvious question then? I mean, I'm the reason I'm surprised and I'm in local government is that this is a private operation that exists outside of the responsibility of a territorial authority, in this particular case, the Northland District Council. Do you have a particular policy view that water should be overseen and supplied by TAs in preference to private providers?
Yeah, the councils need to have an eye on all of these supplies, not just those that they are directly responsible for, but understand what's the state of these supplies, what is the support needed in those communities, even if they're not directly responsible for providing the supply
So are they
themselves.
responsible
Because
legally then, can I ask you, Steve, for all the water that so let's just say it's a private system, it's got a bore somewhere, it services some rural families or something like that. Is the council itself responsible for the quality of that particular drinking water, even though they're not responsible for its supply?
No, no.
They're
So where the
not.
council is not the supplier, they're not responsible for the quality themselves. But there is support the council can provide. Obviously, they'll have technical support. They'll have information around what it takes to effectively run a drinking water treatment. We can, we also have information that we make available to support those running these sorts of supplies, guidance around how to maintain them, how to run them, simple things like what you need to look for and types of treatment and the filtration required, for example. And that's information that is available on our website, and also our regional teams are there to support with. But coming back to the council's interest in this, there is this is a reminder that we'll be putting out to councils in light of this situation, is they need to have a view and understanding of the total quality of drinking water treatment within their territorial area, and particularly including where it's being provided by private supplies and schemes. And if any of those are at risk or at imminent risk, they need to have some thoughts about what their role is and what their plan might be in those situations.
There are thousands of private drinking water bores throughout the country, as you know, Steve, particularly on farms and
Yeah,
on lifestyle blocks.
yeah,
Many may not, in actual fact, meet your current drinking water standards. How do you know? I mean, listen, if I was on one of those, I'd be trying to check all the time because this is me and this is my family. So there's that sort of powerful, if you like, human urge to make sure that you
yeah.
are meeting those standards. But um, that doesn't happen
That's a
everywhere
good point.
necessarily. What
No,
happens
and it's
then?
a good point, Michael. And when I talk about these schemes, I'm really talking about the schemes that serve a number of properties, and I use the cutoff at 25. So 25 or more, the council should have an understanding of how many are in that category.
Yeah.
Um, the individual, we'll call them domestic use, individual household use bores, etc., are not regulated under the legislation. They're not schemes that we have an interest in necessarily becoming involved in. As you'll appreciate, most households are wanting to do the right thing. They'll have an active interest in what is the right thing to do. So we provide guidance and information to make that clear as to what you can do as an individual household to keep your own drinking water safe. But the larger schemes, the ones that carry a higher risk in terms of larger populations, where you've got a reliance, a number of households, a number of people have got reliance on an individual treatment. Those are the ones that we're more interested in to make sure actually that there's some good processes for ensuring that actually that water continues to stay safe.
What about the ones that obviously come to mind, and in my neck of the woods anyhow, is nitrate contamination of private bores, but also the bacterial infections, E. coli, entering the process as well. And I'm assuming that private land or private water users will test for both of those two things. Is there some sort of standard test that you provide, or that they buy off the scale, or what?
Yeah, there's a range of testing options that you can use. We've got information on our website around what that entails. So typically it requires, and it's a great idea to do testing, by the way. I think it's the most responsible thing you can do for an individual household, but also on schemes as well. It's the one thing that we ask them to do and show evidence of, because unless you're testing the water, you don't know what you're having to treat. You don't know what the potential
Mm,
contamination is. So
mm.
it is fantastic advice. So what we have, we're notified of by the laboratories when there are testing results that exceed safe levels. So
So
we
those,
do
so
get
that this
notified
is
of that.
so let me get this right. So when private persons test and they send it off to the lab, they statutorily have to let you know if there is a problem. Is that
The,
right?
yeah, the laboratories need to advise us. So the responsibility is with the laboratory.
Right.
There's also a responsibility with the larger suppliers. So if you're a supplier, this is not the individual households. If you're an individual household with drinking water and you're doing a test, you don't have to send that result to us. That's the laboratory will know what it needs to do.
Yeah.
If you're a large supplier, if you're responsible for the drinking water of, and I use that cutoff of 25 and more properties, then if you're finding contamination in your drinking water, you do need to let us know, and that's where we get interested. So 25 in population of 25 or more, um, we we're keen to have a good understanding of what is the level of contamination, what exists, and what's being done about it. Um, and to your earlier point, Michael, about you'd like to think that we're across everything all the time and ensuring that people are doing the right thing. We have to take a risk-based approach and a proportionate approach in our action, and you have to allow a level of common sense and acknowledge that most people are wanting to do the right thing and are trying to do the right thing. So our approach is providing that information to them. In a situation like Kaio, it became pretty evident that it was not going to get solved, despite the supplier's best intention. It was beyond their means to actually get on the land and solve the problem. So they've made a number of attempts that hadn't flowed through. And in those cases, that's where we step in. And that's where we can either lend assistance, or we can actually use some of the more directive tools like we have with Kaio and putting things under statutory management. Now, I wouldn't suggest we'd go anywhere near that for supply populations under 25. That's simply not our role, not our priority. Our focus is very much guidance in those situations and supporting the individual household or the landowner to do the right thing.
Can I ask then, I'm specifically, there's been a great deal of commentary about groundwater in Christchurch and in Canterbury being under pressure from mostly dairy
Mm.
farming and nitrate contamination. In fact, Waimate, we've talked about this with them, have had to move their bore for their major town to deal with the latter. Is there other particular problem areas that Taumata Arowai is concentrating on in New Zealand?
Yeah, we're keeping an eye on a couple of areas: the Waikato, Canterbury, and Southland, which are showing particular levels of nitrates. Now, the positive for most is that the bores which the town supplies rely on, so the major metro areas, the
Yep,
Christchurch supplies, etc., are not affected by nitrates to the
right.
same extent. So they're safe levels. And we have had only, I think, in the last 2 years, two instances of nitrates affecting town supplies. That was Gore, was the other situation. Now,
Is that Gore and
denitrification can be,
Waimate?
yes, that's correct.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep,
And so in those two cases, they had to issue, it's a do not drink notice. It's not a boil water, it's a do not drink, because with nitrates, it affects the ability of hemoglobin to carry oxygen, and particularly with young children, babies, there's an immediate risk. It's called blue baby syndrome. So it's something to be looked at. If the acceptable values that are set and the standards have been exceeded, please do not drink the water. Find an alternate source. So there are, but again, the good news is through the town supplies, the reticulated supplies, that's being well managed by the council. So they've got a range of approaches that they have in place to extract the safest water. But anybody who is drawing their own bore supply, have an eye. Again, it comes back to your testing. Test your nitrates, test your E. coli, etc. E. coli, the bacteria, is reasonably easy to remove for an individual household. Even protozoa, the giardia, that's reasonably easy to remove. There's a bunch of solutions you can put at a household scale to remove that problem. Nitrates are harder, require a bit more work, and it's certainly suggest getting some advice on that if you find yourself in that situation.
All right. Listen, thank you very much for explaining that to us this morning, Steve. From small places, Kaio, and those sort of difficult cases, the bigger issue starts to arise. I thank you for your time this morning, and I wish you well. Catch up with you next year.
No problem.
Okay, Steve Taylor, Regulatory Services Manager for the New Zealand. Now, it was Taumata Arowai, but you'll be delighted to know that it's got its English name there, and has primacy. It's at the top, Taumata Arowai down the bottom. It's now known as the Water Services Authority. It is formed